Our Home Affairs Portfolio Committee has been informed that a significant number of Chinese nationals have been using fraudulent addresses to apply for visas. Their findings were disclosed by the department's multi-disciplinary task team, which was appointed to probe corruption relating to issuing of visas, resident permits and identity documents. For more on that conversation, we are joined now by Home Affairs Minister, Dr. Motsoaledi. Minister, good evening and thank you very much for your time. I'm going to divert a little bit and take you back to that last conversation that we just played now. The Home Affairs Department, are you involved at all in that extradition process of those two in Eswatini? If so, how? If not, why?
No, extradition. Good evening first. Good evening to the listeners and viewers. Extradition is a function of the Department of Justice. We will get only involved if by any chance, for some reason, they happen to be needing our help in terms of documentation. But otherwise, we are not involved in this particular one, unless they've approached my officials without informing me. But nobody has informed me that our help is needed.
Also, if there are documents, check. There is no need, because we saw you involved in the Tanzania extradition matter, and that was challenged in court and so on and so forth. So I'm just wondering why in this instance we would not be involved.
We got involved in Tanzania matter because it was a deportation. The Tanzanians said they're taking a decision to deport them, and when you deport an individual, they must be handed over to immigration officials. If you don't do so, in terms of international law, it's called a rendition. If you take somebody who is being deported and hand them over to police or the army or any other law enforcement agency other than immigration officials, you are doing rendition on that person and is forbidden. So the police were already there with their airplane in Tanzania, but because the Tanzanians were worried about rendition, they refused to hand them over. They said they'll only hand them over to Home Affairs officials. That's why we got involved. Secondly, because they were having passports which were suspected to be fraudulent, only us in Home Affairs will be able to confirm authenticity of a passport. That's why we were brought in.
I see. All right. Now, let's move on then to why we called you. We, of course, looking at the Lubisi report, it's not new work. It's work, I suppose, that started with that particular investigation and the discovery that came out of the Lubisi report. So, in a sense, this was almost a progress report being given to Parliament. Are you indicating good progress? Are you progressing at the correct speed, I suppose, in the implementation of the Lubisi report as far as you're concerned?
Absolutely, absolutely. Remember, Thabo, that the Lubisi report came with two main recommendations amongst the others. First, that we need to relook at legislation, that there are too many gaps in legislation that encourages these problems of corruption, especially in immigration. Secondly, that we need to put together a multidisciplinary team, because the Lubisi investigation have unearthed certain things that needs somebody to go deeper in. It needs forensic analytics. It needs lawyers. It needs all sorts of people, data analytics, forensic investigators, and even senior counsels, because it was investigating that some people might need to be arrested, others might be deported, some who have been sitting comfortably with South African documents and citizenship, they might have to be deprived of those documents because they were acquired fraudulently. All of those need thorough planning and thorough investigation, because you can easily lose on this type of things in courts, even though you are morally correct, but technically and legally you can actually lose.
Yeah.
So that's why they have to put so many teams and started investigating. But when they were putting reports today, as far as I'm concerned, I saw a lot of progress, because I know how difficult is it when you are investigating malfeasance, because the people who do these things, they know exactly what they are doing. They try not to leave any trail. They try to hide everything they are doing so that they never get caught. And when you are an investigator, it's your job to try and unravel and discover that and put it in front of a judge in such a way that it will be convincing.
Yeah, and that's precisely what got me worried, because the people, as you put it, who do these things are deliberate about them, and there's a particular reason why they're doing them. In 7 years, I asked myself, why would 300,000 Chinese nationals want to come to South Africa illegally when China is looked at as one of those economies that are doing well in the world, superpower, if you like?
Well, that's a very difficult question, Tabo. It better be answered by them, because the question is, you are asking me why are people leaving their countries to come to South Africa. Some of them, Tabo, find it easier to establish businesses here for whatever reason. But we know, and unfortunately, their ambassador did not like this when I said it before. They also love establishing businesses where they exploit illegal labor of illegal people. They like doing that, and they are not the only ones, and it's a pity. We are talking of only Chinese. I think that report has unveiled many other nationalities from all over the world that are doing this. It's only that with the Chinese, they found that very large number, maybe because their population is very big. But I can only conclude that they are looking for business opportunities, which might not flourish back home in China, but will flourish here in South Africa, because they are able to hire illegal people.
Yeah, 300,000 in 7 years. Is that a normal number in terms, if they were to apply properly and there was a legal application? Is that the kind of number that you would be able to process?
Well, for a country like China with billions of people, for them it's not a small number, but for us it is quite big. But for them, I mean, we are talking of a population of more than 1.3 billion people. So when they move all over in large numbers, for them it's normal. But for us, yes, you are right, it's very big.
Yeah. And now you are at a point where this matter, of course, has gone through some of the disciplinary processes. 12 disciplinary matters are being concluded, 9 officials having been dismissed. Is that the lot?
No, these are just investigation. 27 charge sheets have already been finalized. 5 disciplinary hearings have commenced. 10, they are looking for date to set down disciplinary hearing. 12 disciplinary matters have been concluded. 9 officials have been dismissed. Others have been handed over to the Hawks. They are still investigating. And 2 officials have actually resigned. 1 official dismissal is subject to an appeal, which means he has been dismissed and is appealing. So it's a whole lot of... By the way, these figures I'm mentioning here are for officials, Tabu. They are not for people who are outside the department. These are departmental officials who were involved in this corruption and facilitating. We have got hundreds of thousands who are in business, who are ordinary South Africans, who are immigrants like the Chinese we have mentioned. So this work is huge. It's not a small amount of work. That's why today when they were reporting, when they were looking at the amount of data, what you call basis they've got to go through, they mentioned something like 11.9 billion data sets that they have to examine and go through. So it's not a small amount of work. It's huge, very huge indeed.
That's exactly. So you're saying those are just officials, which means there are people who are outside who are participating in this. And hence, I'm also drawn to the fact that there is almost a headquarters or a center that is being used as the address for all these applications. What do we know about that nodal point, and who are the people involved in I suppose, giving this particular address as the epicenter, so to speak?
Well, the investigation unveiled that right from the time of Lubisi, we had such syndicates where we were finding that people are using the same address as if they come in as different people, but basically they are a syndicate, but they stupidly use the same address, which they are not supposed to be doing if they don't want to be. But remember, Tabu, there is no perfect crime anywhere in the world. Every crime, press the correct buttons, and do the correct investigation, then it will be unveiled. But when they were using these same addresses, they were believing because they are different people, they will be regarded as such. And Home Affairs systems were not able to catch that. But this team, multidisciplinary team, have data analytics systems that can link people. They've got a system where once your name is mentioned, it can actually show all the areas where you have been, whether you have been at Beitbridge, OR Tambo, you have been to any Home Affairs office, Refugee Reception Center. It will link all of those. That is the wisdom of the tool that this team has come up with, and it's the one that is really helping us to unveil these things, which over all those periods, they were able to do, knowing very well that Home Affairs cannot link anything together. But this team is able to do that.
Yeah. So it's one thing to find those who are responsible, to discipline those who are responsible, to get them out of the system. How are you now strengthening that particular process so that we don't just keep rotating people in and out and they continue to do the same thing?
Because we really have to deal with corruption. Every department that has got a branch, PD Director General, second in charge. You are aware that departments have got Directors General. Second layer is Deputy Director General. Third layer is Chief Director, and then etc. etc. Now we have got a whole Deputy Director General who's setting the counter-corruption. Inside that branch, we also have a Chief Director for prevention and analysis. That means it's a person whose job is to look at a system. For instance, a system of awarding a visa or a passport, even an ID, any document that we award. They look at the system we follow and examine the possible loopholes and gaps where people who are corrupt might, which people who are corrupt may take advantage of. And then they advise us on how to change those systems. That is what we call prevention and analysis. That means you analyze systems and see how you prevent them. So we have got that. But as I'm saying, we are now having a very active counter-corruption unit, which is every day is investigating in one way or the other. And the ones gave a report to the portfolio committee that more than 60% of all the cases that the counter-corruption unit is investigating are about immigration. The rest is about things like IDs, birth certificate, marriage certificate, fraudulent marriage, etc. But more than 60% is about immigration issues. That's where corruption, most of the corruption is found within the department.
Yeah. Now, you are seeking advice, or have you got legal advice on what should now happen to these 300,000 who would have applied fraudulently into the country?
Yes, they've already given us legal advice, but we are also going to bring in more experienced senior counsel, because you are dealing with people who are corrupt have got a lot of money, and they can hire all the senior counsels and bog you down in court for a very, very, very long time because of the very same money they've stolen. So it will be important that when you face them, you must also look for the most experienced senior counsel, and we are in the process of doing so. But we have already got a legal advice, like advising us on things like PAJA, the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, which is a very difficult act, and because it's not necessarily in Home Affairs, it causes our people serious problems to interpret. An example I want to give, because members of parliament were thinking the investigations are taking too long, why don't you just confiscate all the fraudulent documents? Why don't you just grab them and all that? And I was explaining to them that Pastor Bushiri has a fraudulent permanent residence in South Africa. He's our permanent resident. Permanent resident is one step away from citizenship. He obtained those documents fraudulently, used them to defraud his congregation, his own congregation, for 102 million rand, which is what the Hawks arrested him for. We were very excited and eager to retrieve our documents, lest he start another business or another fraud with them. And we wrote him a letter to inform him that we want to take back our documents. He rushed to court and complained to the judge that the questions we want him to answer is part of his defense in this case with the Hawks. And unfortunately, the judge agreed with him and said we can't take back our documents until such time that he appears in court. In court, you are aware now, this is the third year. The extradition process is taking a long time, but the guy is still keeping our documents. So I was telling members of parliament, they mustn't believe simply because a document was obtained fraudulently. In terms of South African law, you can just go and grab it. It's easy for a person who's corrupt to obtain a fraudulent document, but it's more difficult to get it back because of our legal system, unfortunately. But it's the law that we had to follow.
Yeah. So, Member of Parliament saying, no, it's as simple as they are fraudulent means they can just be annulled. I mean, what's the process of annulment?
Yes, they believe you can just annul or freeze. They were telling us, why don't you just freeze them? You remember that in January, we actually partially lost the case of that matter, where Home Affairs officials were flagging fraudulent IDs, flagging them and even blocking them. And the judge said, no, the law doesn't allow that. But we begged them that the 700,000 IDs that were flagged, he must allow us a period to investigate, and he gave us 12 months, after which he will say, no, you can't do anything. But just to go and say, I suspect that this ID is fraud, I grab it and get it back. South African law doesn't allow us to do that, unfortunately.
Now, the other issue that you were quite passionate about, and I think you were leading this quite prominently, Minister, is the issue of the review and the revamping of the government printing works, because that has been a challenge. According to this particular report, you have now intervened in 120 matters, and 47 are at various stages of completion. What are those areas of intervention, and what actually have you done as far as the ICT security strategy?
Yeah, maybe to understand the background to that, systems collapsed sometimes some 3 years back in the government printing works, a very, very important institution. And most of the IT systems that collapsed it included also financial information and all that. Now, I was very suspicious from the way I was tipped, that this was not just a collapse, it was actually a form of sabotage, because there are people who wanted to hide their shenanigans in terms of tenders and contracts. That's what we were suspecting. So I approached the president that he needs to set up a tribunal. Is government printing works really being sabotaged? Because if you sabotage it, you sabotage South Africa, Thabo, because that's where all the IDs in the country are printed, all the passports in the country are printed, some question papers in matric, government gazettes, and many other issues. So when you sabotage it, you are hitting the heart of government. So I panicked and I told the president, and the president's lawyers advised him that I've got the powers to establish such a tribunal, which I did, and it was chaired by Advocate Muyangu Gumbi, the former advisor to President Thabo Mbeki. And we put it together with experts from CSIR, who are experts in IT, finance, governance, etc., and other experts from other institutions. And after investigating, they couldn't put their finger on the pulse whether this was sabotage, because they said there's a very thin line between direct sabotage and omission. In other words, sabotaging an institution just by omitting, not doing any, in other words, not by commission, not by doing something, but just avoiding to do something which is essential. So they said in order to arrive there, we need to put up a forensic team to go deeper and investigate, because they were not forensic investigators. They were just on a fact-finding mission to find out what happened. So that forensic team is in, and the work that is being done is divided into what happened in finance, what happened in infrastructure, what happens in IT, what happens in supply chain, what happens in the CEO's office. All that work is the one that is being done, and there's a lot of progress that has been reported today.
Minister, we appreciate your time, and thank you very much for coming on and your intervention this evening. That's Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, on the progress being made in implementation of a number of reports in his department, particularly dealing with the fraudulent issuing of visas and the deliberate sabotage of the IT system.